Welcome everyone to my channel.
The morning Chrissy got her termination letter, she didn't cry. She folded it once, slid it into her apron pocket, and went back to scrubbing the kitchen floor, because that was what she did. She kept her head down. She kept her hands moving. She kept Gina fed and safe inside a house that was never meant to hold them this long. She had 1 hour to pack 3 years of her life. But when she walked to the guest quarters and found Gina's little rolling suitcase already open on the bed, socks balled up wrong, a stuffed rabbit jammed against a juice box, her throat closed. "Gina, what are you doing?" The 3-year-old looked up with complete, devastating calm. "We have to wait for Appa." Chrissy's hands stopped moving. In 3 years, she had never once told her daughter that word was allowed. She had never allowed herself to think it. She had cleaned this man's house, raised herself like furniture inside it, invisible, necessary, replaceable, and somewhere in the space between bedtime stories and stolen dinners, her daughter had gone and built a family without asking permission. "He's not your Appa, baby." Gina zipped her bag shut with both hands. "Then why does he cry when he thinks we're sleeping?" The letter came from Mr. Bake, not from Sejun, from Mr. Bake, the household manager, who slid the envelope across the kitchen counter while Chrissy was straining rice, and said, "End of the month, the way someone announces a weather change." Practical, unapologetic, already moving on before she'd even touched the paper. She waited until he left the kitchen to open it. The words were clean and formal. Services no longer required. Severance attached. Accommodation available for 14 days post-tenure. She read it twice, not because she misunderstood, but because she needed her face to finish reacting before Gina woke up from her nap. She told herself it was fine. It was always going to end. She had known that the morning she arrived. 27 years old, one duffel bag, Gina strapped to her chest and a carrier because she hadn't been able to afford a stroller yet. She had stood in the entrance of this house and understood immediately that she did not belong here. Marble floors, silence that had weight, a household staff who looked at her with the careful blankness of people paid not to have opinions. The agency had placed her because she was qualified, available, and willing to live in. The nursing credentials hadn't transferred. Korean licensing requirements had seen to that. And she had a 4-month-old and no family in the country, and exactly one marketable skill left. She was organized, she was discreet, and she did not ask questions. This household required all three. She had told herself 6 months, then 12. Then she stopped telling herself anything and just kept her head down and her hands moving because Gina was sleeping through the night and the room was warm, and somewhere along the way the temporary had grown furniture and a routine and a small girl who knew which floorboards creaked and which kitchen drawer held the good scissors and exactly how many steps it was from her bedroom door to the garden. Chrissy folded the letter and put it in her apron pocket. She pulled Gina's suitcase from the top shelf of the wardrobe, the small pink one with the broken wheel they kept meaning to replace, and set it open on the bed. She started with the practical things. Socks, the spare inhaler, the cardigan Gina had outgrown but refused to surrender. She worked efficiently. She had always been efficient. It was the thing she gave this house that no one ever had to ask for twice. Pressed uniforms, silent mornings, a daughter who had learned early to read a room and stay small inside it. She did not let herself think about what 3 years of proximity does to a person. She did not let herself think about the fact that the letter had come from Mr. Bake, not from Sejun. She pulled open the second drawer and kept packing. It started with a glass of water. The evening after he canceled the termination, Sejun came to the kitchen at 7:15, not summoned, not expected, and stood at the counter and poured himself a glass of water and drank it slowly while Gina narrated the construction of her plate with the seriousness of a nature documentary. He did not sit. He did not stay long. He rinsed the glass and left, and Chrissy kept her eyes on the stove and told herself it meant nothing. He came back the next evening. This time, Gina saw him before Chrissy did. She slid off her chair, dragged it 6 inches to the left with both hands and considerable effort, and pulled the chair across from Chrissy away from the table with a loud scrape. "Sit there," she said, pointing. He sat there. Chrissy served the food with the focused calm of a woman who had chosen, consciously and in real time, not to react. She set his plate down the same way she set down Gina's, without ceremony, without eye contact, professional, appropriate. The behavior of a household employee whose employer had joined a meal, which was a normal thing that happened in normal households and meant absolutely nothing. Sejun picked up his chopsticks. Gina began talking. This was the thing about Gina. She did not understand that silence between adults could be structural, load-bearing, keeping something standing that would otherwise fall. She talked the way she breathed, continuously, without warning, about whatever was most pressing: the broken wheel on her suitcase, a bug she had found and then lost, a song she was composing that currently had one word and a lot of humming. Sejun listened to all of it. Not performatively, he didn't lean in or make the sounds of a man performing interest. He just listened, eating steadily, and occasionally asked a question that was so precisely the right question that Gina would stop and stare at him with delighted suspicion, as though she hadn't decided yet how he knew. Chrissy watched this happen every evening for 11 days. She watched him learn which parts of Gina's stories required a response and which ones were rhetorical. She watched Gina save his seat with increasing territorial confidence, shooting away the household staff with the 3-year-old's absolute authority. She watched something quiet and unannounced take shape at her kitchen table. Not romance, not yet anything she could name, just the steady accumulation of shared meals and small habits and the particular ease that builds between people who keep showing up to the same place. She kept her professionalism intact. He kept his distance exactly calibrated. But on the 11th evening, Sejun looked up from his plate and said, to no one specifically, "This is good." Gina said, "Mama made it." A beat of silence. Sejun felt him not look at her. "I know," he said. She moved the dishes to the sink and said nothing at all. Yoon Tae-sik had a theory about useful men. A useful man, in his estimation, was a man with nothing he couldn't walk away from, no attachments that could be mapped, no soft places that could be pressed. Oh Se-jun had been the most useful man he'd ever served, precise, unsentimentally loyal to the organization, and grief-hardened in a way that made him nearly frictionless. You could point him at a problem, and the problem ceased to exist. You never had to worry about leverage because there was nothing to lever. That had been true for a long time. Yoon Tae-sik sat in his office on the 14th floor and turned a pen slowly between 2 fingers and thought about the kitchen. He had not seen the kitchen himself. He had not needed to. He had people whose function was to notice things and report them plainly, without interpretation. That was how you kept information clean. What they reported was this: 11 consecutive evenings, the same table, the same 3 people, the child saving a seat. He set the pen down. The termination had been a clean test, bureaucratic, deniable, the kind of administrative decision that happened in large households with no particular drama. He had routed it through Mr. Back because Mr. Back was efficient and did not ask questions above his pay grade. The expected outcome, the logical outcome for a man of Se-jun's discipline, was that the notice would be processed, the woman and her child would leave, and the household would return to its correct configuration. Se-jun canceled it within 4 hours of walking through the door. No meeting, no review, no explanation given to anyone. Tae-sik had noted this, the way he noted useful information, without surprise, without judgment, with the quiet satisfaction of a hypothesis confirmed. He had watched him for 9 years, watched him build the organization into something formidable and controlled, watched him bury his grief so deep that it had become a structural feature, watched him go 3 years without once letting anyone close enough to matter. And then a Maid's 3-year-old had pulled up a chair. Tai Sik almost respected it. He opened the folder on his desk. The woman's details were thorough. Background check from when she was hired, updated periodically as standard practice. Nothing complicated, nothing that required action yet. Yet. He closed the folder and stood at the window and thought about the city and thought about the specific usefulness of patience. A man with something to lose did not know it until the moment you took it. He would wait. The door to that room had already clicked shut. He was simply the only one who had heard it. She found it by accident. A printed email, misfiled between two household invoices she'd been asked to sort and pass to Mr. Bake's office. She almost didn't read it. She was efficient and discreet, and those two qualities had served her for 3 years precisely because she applied them without exception. But her name was in the subject line. She read it standing at the filing cabinet, once, all the way through. Then she put it back between the invoices exactly where she'd found it, finished sorting the stack, delivered it without expression, and went to check on Gina's bath. She waited until Gina was asleep. Then she went to the kitchen, filled a glass of water, and stood at the counter and did not drink it. Sejun came in at 10:40, the way he sometimes did, not for anything specific, just the quiet end-of-night movement of a man who didn't sleep easily. He stopped when he saw her. She didn't turn around. "Did you know?" she asked. A pause. Not the pause of a man deciding whether to lie, the other kind. "No," he said. "Not until I saw you in the entrance hall." She nodded slowly. The glass was cold in her hand. "It was arranged," she said. "The termination. It didn't come from HR. Someone routed it through Mr. Bake." "I know," he said. "I've been looking into it." She turned then because she needed to see his face when she asked the next part. "Was it because of Gina?" He looked at her steadily. "It was because of me," he said. "Someone decided that your presence here created a variable they wanted removed." She absorbed this. A variable. That's how certain people think. Is that how you think? Something shifted in his expression. Not offense, something quieter. "No," he said. "It isn't." The kitchen was very still. Outside, the garden lights threw long shapes across the floor between them. "I should have left," Chrissy said. Not to him exactly, just aloud. "When Gina was 1, I told myself 6 months, and then I kept. There was always a reason to stay another month." "Was it only reasons?" he asked. She looked at him for a moment too long before she looked away. "I have a daughter," she said carefully. "I don't get to want things that put her in the path of—" She stopped. "I don't get to be careless." "I know," he said, and the way he said it, without argument, without pressure, told her he understood exactly what she hadn't finished saying. Neither of them moved. "The person who arranged it," Chrissy finally said. "Are we safe?" Sejun's jaw tightened once. "You're safe," he said. "I'll make sure of it." She nodded. She put the untouched glass of water in the sink. "Good night," she said. "Good night." She walked out. He stayed in the kitchen a long time after. Chrissy was gone for 50 minutes. A pharmacy run, Gina's antihistamine, the specific brand, the one that didn't make her sluggish. 20 minutes there, 20 back, 10 inside. She had confirmed with the afternoon staff that Gina was in the garden. She had confirmed it twice. She came through the gate and knew immediately. The quality of stillness on the front steps was wrong. 2 staff members standing too carefully, the way people stand when they are waiting to deliver something and haven't decided how yet. Chrissy's bag hit the ground before they finished the first sentence. They had looked away for minutes, a handoff gap. Who was watching became briefly unclear between 2 staff changes, and Gina, who could open the side garden latch if she stood on her toes, apparently had. Chrissy was already moving when they told her Gina had been returned. She found her in the entrance hall, seated on the bottom stair, rabbit in her lap, eating a small orange someone had peeled and segmented for her. She looked up at Chrissy with mild interest, the expression of someone who had been on a minor adventure and found it satisfactory. "Mama, a man gave me fruit." Chrissy crossed the floor and gathered her up in one motion, both arms, all of her, pulled against her chest with a force that made Gina squirm and protest into her shoulder. She did not let go. She pressed her face into Gina's hair and stayed there, breathing, counting her, making sure. "Too tight, Mama." She loosened her arms by exactly nothing. The staff member who received Gina at the gate delivered the message quietly to the room. The man who brought her back had said 4 words before leaving. "He has things that can be touched." The entrance hall went very quiet. Chrissy heard Sejun's meeting end down the corridor, raised voices from his team, his own voice cutting through once, briefly, and then Stepfoot's. He came through the doorway still in his meeting clothes, eyes moving across the room in one sweep until they found Chrissy on the floor. She had sat down at some point, back against the wall, Gina in her lap. He looked at her face. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't issue instructions or pull out his phone or do any of the things a man of his particular authority might reasonably do in that moment. He crossed the room and sat down on the floor beside them. Not close enough to crowd her, close enough to be there. Gina, untroubled and sticky-fingered from the orange, looked between them once, decided this arrangement was acceptable, and redistributed herself so that her legs were across Sejun's and her head was against Chrissy's arm. Within 10 minutes, she was asleep. The message sat in the room with them, cold and unaddressed. Neither of them moved. He waited until Gina was fully asleep. Then he stood carefully and adjusted the blanket Chrissy had pulled over her without disturbing the weight of her against the cushions. He looked at her for a moment, the specific way he sometimes did when he thought no one was measuring it. Then he walked down the corridor and closed the study door behind him. Chrissy heard the click. Chrissy sat with Gina and listened to the house. She couldn't hear what was said. She could hear the register of his voice through the wall, low, unhurried, the particular cadence of a man who had already made every decision and now was simply communicating the outcome. It was not a long call. It didn't need to be. A door opened somewhere in the east wing. Footsteps she recognized as Tae-sik's, precise, evenly spaced, a man who controlled even the sound of his movement, crossed the floor above her, stopped, then 2 sets of footsteps, and the front door, and then nothing. Chrissy looked down at Gina's sleeping face. The house settled back into quiet. She didn't know exactly what had happened. She understood the shape of it. The organization Sejun ran did not resolve problems through conversation, and Tae-sik had stopped being a loyal piece and become a liability the moment he put a 3-year-old in a car to deliver a message. She understood that. She was not naive about the world she had been living inside for 3 years. She should chosen each of those years to keep her eyes on what was in front of her. Sejun came back 40 minutes later. He didn't come in with the energy of a man who had just done something. He came in the way he'd been coming to the kitchen for weeks now, without announcement, without agenda, simply appearing in the space and settling into it. He sat in the chair across from the sofa where Gina slept and rested his elbows on his knees and looked tired in a way he had never seen him before. Not defeated, just emptied of something, like a room after furniture had been moved. Chrissy watched him for a moment. "Is it finished?" she asked. He looked up. "Yes," he said. She nodded. She didn't ask what finished meant. She didn't ask about Tae-sik or the phone call or the footsteps that had left the front door had not returned. She had asked the only question that mattered to her, and he had answered it, and she believed him, and the quiet fact of that belief moved through her without drama, the way things settle when they finally find their level. She looked back at Gina. "She didn't know she was anything wrong," she said softly. "The whole time. She just ate the orange." A long pause. "Good," he said. They sat together in the silence and let the house be still around them. She found the rabbit on Gina's pillow. Gina was asleep, had been for an hour, sprawled in the boneless way of children who had decided the day is finished and surrendered to it completely. The rabbit sat propped against the headboard, one ear bent, one eye slightly loose, loved into asymmetry over 3 years of being dragged and clutched and slept on. Chrissy picked it up and sat on the edge of the bed and held it in her lap. She had spent 3 years being careful with her words, her eyes, the amount of space she allowed herself to take up in this house. She had built a life here that was functional and safe and deliberately narrow. A corridor, not a room, because corridors had exits at both ends and you could always see the way out. She had told herself that was wisdom. She had told herself she was protecting Gina. She turned the rabbit over in her hands. Gina had packed it first, before the slippers, before the photograph, before any argument had been made. She had put the rabbit in the suitcase because it belonged with the people she loved, and to Gina, that equation was simple. It had always been simple. Chrissy was the one who had spent 3 years making it complicated. She thought about the entrance hall and the canceled termination, the kitchen table and 11 evenings, and the precise question he had asked, was it only reasons, and the way he had not pushed when she didn't answer. He thought about the floor outside Gina's door, both of them sitting with the sleeping child between them, and the 40 minutes of silence that asked nothing of her and gave her everything. He thought about the word Gina had used the first day, Appa. She had told herself Gina was 3 and didn't understand, but Gina understood exactly one thing with complete clarity.
Who showed up? Who stayed? Who learned her song and bought the right medicine and sat on the floor when sitting on the floor was what the moment needed? Chrissy set the rabbit back against the headboard. She stood up, smoothed her hands against her sides, and walked out of the room. Sejun was in the study. She could see the light under the door. She knocked once and opened it without waiting, because if she waited, she would reconsider, and she was finished reconsidering. He looked up from his desk. She crossed the room and sat down in the chair beside him, not across, beside, close enough that it meant something, deliberately close, and she watched him register it. "Gina wants pancakes tomorrow," she said. "You should be there." He looked at her for a long moment. The study was quiet. Outside, Seoul did what it always did, kept moving, indifferent and continuous. "What time?" he said. She exhaled. 8, she said. "She wakes up hungry." He nodded once. It was enough. The pancakes were slightly burnt. Gina ate them with total satisfaction, both feet swinging under the chair, rabbit propped against the juice glass like a guest who had also been expected. Sejun sat on one side. Chrissy sat on the other. Nobody had assigned the seats. They had simply arrived at the table, and this was how it was. Gina had known it would be. That is the thing about children who have not yet learned to lie to themselves. They see the shape of things clearly, without the interference of fear or history, or the careful management of hope. Gina looked at 2 people who were trying very hard not to need each other and saw, plainly, a family. She packed her bag. She saved a seat. She waited. She was 3 years old and she was never wrong. Sometimes the people who see us most clearly are the ones we spend the most energy trying to protect. We think we are shielding them. We do not realize they are, in their small and absolute way, saving us back. Gina reached across and stole a piece of Sejun's pancake without asking. He let her. Chrissy looked down at her plate and smiled at nothing in particular. If this story found something in you, subscribe. There's more where this came from.